recording.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Ali, do you want to be a co-host so you can record, or?
Oh no, I'm just recording it through my desktop.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
no problem.
Thank you.
You know, because the two key parties, Fred Lancaster and the AVP and Greens, they're the ones that form the government, right? And now the government is dissolved because of the election law. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens. Well, both parties hoping to improve their positions. Naturally, that's good why they're doing it. And, you know, we've had some really good government over the last 3.5 years, I think. And I would love it to continue.
Yeah, and that's why I, would have said continue on the way it was going instead of this election. It seemed to be working out when there was a voice in the back.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
You may want to ask that question.
I just want to know if there's a lot of, if there's any natives in the Greens.
Good question. That's a very good question. So you may want to get up close near your news so you can hear. Because hearing might be a problem.
You don't have your big speakers?
No, just got the sound coming off the computer. So feel free to move up as head as you feel comfortable. The other possibility is you can go up to Daniel's computer desk.
Oh, yeah.
And listen there. The only thing is when he's got, you can hear there, but if you want to speak, of course, you have to unmute his thing, and then we sometimes get an echo from the two computers because they're so close.
Oh, yeah.
But we've got it signed on there as well, simply for purposes of allowing more people to get close if they want to listen and be heard.
Listen and be heard.
I mean, you may want to, I was just telling the folks here, Daniel, if they want to use your computer desk and say something, they have to unmute it, right?
Yes.
You'll have to show them how to do that.
That's what I'm reading about. Your sound is coming out of here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way to improve that or no?
Yeah.
But I don't want you to, don't mess and get the connection mixed up, okay?
Oh, no, it's got nothing to do with it.
When you're ready, Barry, I think we're ready to start.
All right then. Wonderful. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm anticipating more people joining, but let's start especially out of fairness to Bridget and Nikki for showing up, and thank you very much to both of you for making the time to join us. I know some of you are recording it, and I think as Tim said, or will say, people can record just by pushing the appropriate button on their own computers. So my name is Barry Morris, and I'm the minister at the Longhouse Church in East End, Vancouver, just east of, 2 blocks east of Nanaimo and 1 block north of East Hastings. And welcome to this, session where, in my opinion, the two most serious candidates representing the two most serious parties, after all, they formed the government in a coalition up until just 2 weeks ago, or was it a month ago? I forget. So they're available to us. Bridget for the Greens and Nikki for the NDP. And before we start, Tim, in a minute after you maybe say something, if you need to, by way of moderatorship, just want to, I'll ask both candidates to take a minute or so, briefly, right up front, to say something about themselves, because not everybody might necessarily know enough about you to kind of situate you. But Tim, you want to say something first of all about the mechanics, just so that we don't lose people?
Sure. For those that on Zoom, just a couple of things. If you write your question in the chat box, I will either hopefully get a chance to ask it or to summarize similar questions to ask the candidates. And that would be great. Secondly, as Barry mentioned, there is recording. So if you don't want your video screen on because of the recording, please turn it off. But I think everybody's done that. So we're okay. So go ahead, Barry. That's great.
All right, then. Well, I'm just going to go by alphabetical. If that's, hopefully that you understand that's one way to do this. So I'll ask Bridget, if you will, Bridget, to share a word about yourself, and then Nikki, if you could keep it to a minute or so, just by way of introduction, you'll have a chance to say more later.
Okay.
Good evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this, Barry and the Longhouse Ministry. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I live and am running for office within arbitrary borders on the unceded and traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I say this not to only acknowledge the land, but also acknowledge my privilege here as a settler because of colonialism, what I can do better to care for this land, who lived here before me, and what personal practices I can put into place to work towards reconciliation. A little bit about me. I am Bridget Burns, the BC Green Party candidate for Vancouver-Hastings. I was born and raised here in East Vancouver. I grew up here, went to before and after school programs here, lived in rental and co-op housing here. I have, for over 20 years, worked in the hospitality industry in all roles and interacted with a variety of folks. I've spent the last 10 years organizing community events and contributing to growing a movement that I personally believe in. I am vegan, and collecting donations for vulnerable people in the downtown East Side through these events. With the onset of COVID and events getting shut down, I recently had to pivot and began working on an organic farm in Tawasin, and it has been overwhelmingly satisfying and highlights the struggles of small-scale farming and the importance of food security here in BC. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Now, Nikki, please.
All right, I hope everybody can hear me. I just wanted to start by also acknowledging the traditional territories that I am calling in from, which is the same as everybody, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. And I'd like to thank the organizers for putting this together and allowing people to share in your video in the church there. And I'd also like to thank Bridget for joining me in this debate. And I know that this is a great part of the democratic process when we can engage with people. My name's Nikki Sharma. I am running in Vancouver-Hastings because I love the community. I come from a lot of the movements that come from the community, and I'm just so proud of who we are as a community. We care about each other. We care about making the world a better place, and we care about making our neighbors better. And I'm a lawyer, and I started practicing law 15 years ago, moved from a small town in the interior. I started with representing with Indigenous people on their rights and title, and worked representing in residential school survivors, just at the forefront of when those cases were coming forward about historic abuses in residential school. I worked in the community with women fleeing violence to help them find stable transition away from the violence in their communities. I worked with Minister Chen in Victoria to help bring the childcare plan, and also with the coalition government with Sonia Furstenau and with the Green Party to make our Childcare BC plan. And most recently, I switched full-time to working on the climate crisis as the biggest challenge of our time. And meeting climate reduction targets is very important to me. I also serve as a vice chair for Van City Credit Union. I'm proud of the cooperative movement and very much a part of it. And I just thank you all for hosting this, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Nikki. Okay, other people have signed on, and welcome to you. We're not going to introduce all ourselves individually, but nice to see you, or to see your name at least. We're going to proceed now with several questions that the candidates have received, and some of you by way of invitation might have also received them. There's about 6 questions in general. Each one of those could probably take the full hour or less now that we have it, as much as we have it. But I'm just going to ask the candidates to respond, if they can, concisely or succinctly or briefly. There's obviously more to what you could say. 3 of us put these questions together and sent them out to the 3 main candidates in Van Hastings riding, Liberal, NDP, and Green. And so they've seen the questions more or less as sent. So question 1 is, poverty and health are intertwined. As Shane Simpson, the retiring incumbent for Vancouver-Hastings, and also Minister for Poverty Reduction and Social Development, he was in charge of exploring his portfolio, his department, the feasibility around what it would mean, what it would take to implement a guaranteed livable income or some people call it a basic income. If it's called a basic income, I personally prefer to call it a basic adequate income, and commit to follow through. But now that the election's been called, that quite likely has been postponed, shelved, or even neutered, so to speak. So if you are elected, Nikki or Bridget, do you commit to follow through on the work thus far done? And if it has been shelved, commit to reviving it. That is, the work being done to study the feasibility, the practicality, the need for a basic adequate income. So Bridget, do you want to go ahead first, then we'll alternate in the next question.
Okay, sure, thanks. Well, I would say a guaranteed livable income is first and foremost, we are past the point of feasibility studies. We need real action right now. Greens have been fighting for a guaranteed livable income for years. I campaigned on it in 2019 federally, and now here I am again. COVID has exacerbated existing inequalities in our society and increased the number of people facing economic insecurity. As we rebuild, we can't afford to go back to our old patchwork of social supports that do not meet the needs of people. We need to build a more resilient social safety net that lifts people up and doesn't leave anyone behind. We can begin this task by integrating the principles of a basic income, simplicity, economic security, and reduced stigma into our social safety net. The program we have right now perpetuates poverty, and it doesn't have to be this way. The purpose of our social safety net should be to help people get out of poverty. To do that, people need certainty, security, and the ability to save and plan for their futures, and representatives who want them to get out of poverty. The Greens will transition towards a basic income by implementing a basic income for youth in care moving into adulthood immediately, transitioning towards basic income for everyone by increasing income support levels, beginning with making the $300 crisis supplement permanent, and ensuring that those receiving income assistance are not de-incentivized from working due to fear they'll be penalized by government clawbacks.
Thank you, Bridget. It was sensibly concise and not easy to do. Nikki, please.
I'll try to do the same.
Okay.
So I wanted to start by commending Shane for all his work with the minister with a portfolio of poverty reduction. For the first time, BC has a poverty reduction strategy and a plan. And through tremendous work on his part with income supports and actual legislative targets, we've started to lift people out of poverty, and then we're hit by COVID. And I just want to state that I know that this is going to be a struggle for a lot of people in the community during this challenging time. The Guaranteed Basic Income Study, and I'm told by Shane, who I have the luxury and privilege that I'm very grateful for of learning about all the work that was in progress, or also what he's accomplished and what he hoped to with this government. That it'll be a very comprehensive and leading study, not only about basic income, but also the effectiveness of just support programs in general and how we can use them to effectively get people out of poverty. So that work will be done in December, and then we will be able to have a look at all of our support programs and what the best way is to lift people out of poverty. So I'm committed to following through and continuing with that work that was done. And I just also wanted to say that pre-COVID, because of the different support programs that the BC NDP and the federal government with the Greens put in place with the targets, we were making significant progress. If you remember, with the BC Liberals, we inherited one of the worst child poverty rates, I think, in the country. And because of the different supports that we were able to put in place, pre-COVID, their signs were that we were out to achieving our target of reducing it by 50%, well before the 2020-40 target. We do have a target of reducing poverty by 25% with our plan by 2024, and child poverty in half by 2024. And with the significant work that we've already done as a government, you have our commitment to continuing to do that.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, then, if I may ask a second question. This comes from Jeanette McIntosh, who can't be here tonight. She writes, some BC municipalities and provinces or territories have declared a climate state of emergency. Question is then, are you personally and is the party you represent ready to declare this climate state of emergency? And if yes, how is this to be reflected in the decisions and actions related to the fossil fuel subsidies, namely LNG and the construction of the Site C dam? So this time we'll switch the order of respondents, if we may. Nikki, you can go first, and then Bridget can follow.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I see the climate crisis as an emergency. It's part of the work that I do as part of my daily job. And I think it's critical that we meet our climate targets, not just net zero by 2050, but our 2030 and 2040 targets. I'm thinking of the question, and I actually looked at the provincial legislation for state of an emergency, and I'm not sure that it gives us the tools for us to address the climate crisis, but I do think, unfortunately, that we'll be needing to declare a state of emergency during natural events that come from the impacts of climate change. We have tools under the Climate Accountability Act to set legislated targets for each sector of the economy, and I believe that those targets should be specific and show transparency, especially with our most polluting sectors, on how we get to our goals. And I know and I believe that addressing the climate crisis will require transformative action. And this means that to meet our targets, we need to move away from fossil fuel expansion onto clean energy. And this means also that public money needs to go to investing in the types of projects and economy that will lead us to meet our climate targets. And I believe that our future, our children's future, depends on that transition. Just personally, my commitment to the environment began when I was a teenager growing up in a small coal mining town. I have an environmental biology degree and a law degree that focused on environmental law. And I know that a lot of these struggles during this transition will mean that we have to put the workers and the rural communities that were based on fossil fuels at the forefront of our transition. So to figure out how we bring everybody along, because climate justice has to be a component of that. And as the BC NDP, we are social, labor, and environmental movements. And I'm just so eager to have those conversations, if elected, with my colleagues to ensure that we can go do this transition. And I would definitely be a champion for us meeting our climate targets if elected in BC. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Bridget, please.
Yes, well, the science is clear. Without massive intervention to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, we are heading towards catastrophe. The Green Party was formed because no other political party takes climate or the environment seriously enough. In the last 3.5 years, the NDP has increased fossil fuel subsidies by 79% since the Liberal government was in power. Subsidies are now over $1 billion per year of BC taxpayer money. BC Greens will end fossil fuel subsidies and transition those workers who we care very deeply about to more sustainable jobs for the future. A note on Site C. John Horgan and the NDP campaigned on canceling Site C. In 2017, he agreed to listen to the advice of the Utility Commission. When overwhelming evidence came back that they should not proceed, he chose to ignore it and went all in. And now, in light of new overwhelming evidence, this project should at the very least be delayed until it can be reviewed appropriately. The NDP are still refusing to take action on this. It is the most vulnerable people in society who suffer first and hardest from climate and ecological breakdown. A leader and a party that holds the same values as I do gives me the hope that more Greens in Victoria will help bring bold climate action to BC.
Thank you, Bridget. Tim, may I ask one more question, and then you might want to take a question or two from the chat box. Is that okay? All right.
We've only got one question in the chat box so far, so you're good to
Okay,
go.
well, let me ask this one. This is also to both of you, of course. Will you commit, if elected, to serious and specific proportional representation which could assure that the kind of sensible sharing of power agreement that we've had witnessed over the last few years will have an opportunity to continue and assure each person of his or her vote that it really counts? So this time it's Bridget that goes first.
Sure, thank you. Greens are probably the most in favor of proportional representation. I cannot say enough in support of proportional representation. To have more voices at the table, Greens would definitely get more votes. We probably wouldn't be in an election right now if PR had passed. Now more than ever, it's important to keep power in check. Politics as usual does not work for the people of BC. It only works for traditional political parties. The last 3 years have been possible because the Greens have cooperated with the NDP to provide stability while holding them accountable and challenging them to do better. Unfortunately, BC has voted on this in the last election at the insistence of the Greens, although I agree with many that the campaign was flawed and think it would have had a different outcome if the NDP had provided a better process and did not make it so complicated and hard to understand. I think there's a way to communicate the benefits and necessity of PR that just unfortunately was not communicated during that campaign. I hope to bring it to the table once again.
Thank you, Bridget. And Nikki, please.
Okay, thank you. I just want to start by saying that as a woman of color that's been involved in politics, I understand the barriers that some kind of be faced by electoral systems. So it's something that I've advocated for on a local level municipally, and certainly see that different levels can do better with representation. And I know that with our Green colleagues of the last government, we worked together and not only advocated for a proportional representation system, but had a citizens assembly that came up with ideas to put before the electorate. And I have to say that I respect the decision of the electorate. And, you know, I think that we need to make sure that every time we make a decision, we put it towards people who are affected, especially in a democratic process. And although we're disappointed, and I'm disappointed with the results, we have to respect the decision of the people.
Thank you, Nikki. Tim, let's just take a minute, and you have a question from the chat box that you could express? Unmute yourself, Tim.
I don't know if this is a question that either candidate can answer, but one of the questions from Jasilo is, why is Election BC not hosting and promoting these type of events? Is it a budget issue? Their website's very difficult to navigate for a voter simply looking to find information. I don't know if either of you have a comment about that.
Thanks, Tim.
I don't have a comment. To my knowledge, I haven't seen Elections Canada or BC promote community all candidates events before. I'm not against that. I think it would be great. I do know that they only had 30 days to get their election offices ready and all this stuff. So there probably wasn't enough time during this election, but maybe in the future, that's something we could look at.
Thank you, Bridget. Any comment, Nikki?
You know, I think it is a great idea. The more that we have these kind of debates or discussions with people and take questions, the better. I mean, I don't have an answer as specifically as to why Elections BC doesn't or does do this. I just don't know. But I know that part of our campaign, we've been trying to do online forums because COVID, we can't be in the same room as people the same way, but it's certainly something that's important.
Thank you. Now, Tim, I'm going to ask another question. I noticed Jeanette McIntosh has joined us. And Jeanette, I was going to ask you to, would you want to read out question number 5? Do you have the questions in front of you, Jeanette? You got to unmute, Jeanette.
Yes, I'm sorry, Barry. Sorry for being late. No, I do not have the questions in front of me. So why don't you go ahead and read them?
Okay, then I will. I just,
Yeah.
Jeanette was a part of formulating these questions, so I didn't want to leave her out of the mix.
And
Okay,
Barry,
thanks for
just let you know that Margaret's here and I can do the question 5
Oh,
when
thank
it
you,
comes
Margaret.
up.
I didn't know you were on. Please go ahead, Margaret.
Okay, I don't have the question in front of me, but it is about affordable housing for families and how we can make sure it's really adequate, affordable, and transparent so that we can hear every 6 months what is actually being built across the Lower Mainland. Adequate being, you know, for families that are on social assistance, those on you know, a living wage, those on minimum wage, and, you know, building it for families.
So your question, Margaret, in a nutshell is?
Let's hear about the affordable housing commitment and transparency about what's actually getting built, not what's just promised.
Thank you. Nikki, you want to go first, and then Bridget this time go second?
Sure. I'll just start by saying that I know just connecting and having a young family and connecting with people in the community, that this is one of the biggest challenges that I hear from a whole range of people across Vancouver, actually. I hear an echo. I'm not sure if that's, is that?
Not sure. I'm going to mute you.
because I need to be heard.
If you're not talking, I wonder if you could mute yourself so that we can hear Nikki.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to make sure I was heard. So when the coalition government came in with the Greens 3.5 years ago, we just can reflect on the state of housing. You know, prices were skyrocketing. There wasn't enough supportive housing, and there was a real crisis of affordability. And, you know, just over 3.5 years working with the Green Party, we've made significant efforts, although I know there's always more work to be done. We passed a 30-point plan for housing affordability, and we focused on not only figuring out how to end speculation and end money laundering, so to all those pressures that were driving up prices that were the worst were affecting everybody, and we've made significant work on that. Our speculation tax has put 11,000 more rental units on the market because of the action that we took there. We put a cap on rent increases, so we capped it at inflation, and that saved renters $333 approximately a year. We're on track for 58,000 more housing starts over 5 years, so that's an unprecedented kind of pace of investing in housing. In the question that was asked, 25,000 homes are already complete or underway. We've invested in student housing, which is so important, 450 million in student housing. So what does that do? When you invest in student housing, it helps students actually live closer to university, but frees up the bottom end of the housing market for communities. And we've heard from seniors, particularly because of investments in SFU, so around our area, that there's rental houses that have become available because of that investment in student housing. We have a 10-year plan, and I know we're making progress, but there's a lot more work to do. One of the commitments we have in the platform is committing to a rent freeze, which we did during the pandemic to 2021, and a renter's rebate that's income tested. We will commit to building thousands more middle income rentals and continue to complete our housing plan. One of the things that I'm really proud of running with the BC NDP is the number of commitments that we kept in our last term of 3.5 years, and did so much work in such a short amount of time with our Green colleagues. And that's something that we'll continue to do. It's going to take a while for us to complete that and really build enough and make enough difference for families for affordable housing because of the mess that we inherited for so long. So yeah, I'm really proud of these commitments, and I know that they'll benefit families if we keep investing.
Bridget, you're up.
Sorry about that. I didn't unmute.
Affordable housing. I grew up in rental and co-op housing with my single working mom. I don't know how families make it today. I don't know if we would have had to have been able to have safe and stable housing. I did have access to co-op housing, which I'm a huge advocate for. So I'm not going to do big picture stuff. I'm going to talk about very straight to the details of what the Greens want to do for housing in BC. Expand the diversity of the forms of housing in our communities and ensure that our housing is affordable for people who work and live in our cities. It starts with a housing first approach and accelerating investments to affordable, supportive, and social housing on a priority basis. This is an emergency. It's a crisis and a #1 priority in this city. We've seen that as a province, we can mobilize and organize around a crisis. I want to see that same action with housing. Expand supports for co-op housing through extended leases for existing co-ops about to expire, create a land bank for new co-ops, and provide security for co-ops on leased land. The co-op I grew up in on Victoria and Pender has been condemned and has been torn down. Where did those families go? Low to middle income families need space. They need homes with enough space for their families. Cooperatives often provide those 3-bedroom units that, you know, a family of 4, 5, 6 people can thrive and be comfortable in. And Greens will establish a fund to support the acquisition and maintenance of rental housing for nonprofits to maintain affordable rental units and address the financialization of the rental market. Housing has become a commodity in this city, in this province, and not a human right. And introduce a grant that applies to low and moderate income earners who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And I have very much been there. Community over profits. And housing for everyone needs to be at the center of the housing crisis discussion.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Bridget and Nikki. Tim, before we ask the 6th question, I think Terry Patton has a question that might be, or a comment he wants to have response to.
Okay.
Sure. This is a question to Nikki, and it's one that I missed asking a campaigner, NDP campaigner face-to-face, and I kick myself for not asking that question. I simply, I supported a lot of the initiatives of the NDP, but the one that really mystifies me and I find contradictory is support for the NDP support for an LNG pipeline, particularly in view of the damage to the environment that's done by fracking. And fracking is very necessary in order to supply that pipeline. The environmental damage, particularly to our water supply, is, well, unconscionable. So Nikki, I don't understand it. Can you explain why Horgan and company support it?
Thanks for the question. I can tell you that as somebody who's worked in climate justice and environmental work through my life, I understand that we need to look at the impacts in the environment, so particularly when we transition to a cleaner economy because of climate change. And that's something that I believe in and that I would champion if elected with the BC NDP. You know, I haven't had a chance to be elected to sit and be a part of the decision when it comes to the details of this particular one. And, you know, I can tell you that I believe that if we're going to make our carbon reduction targets, that we need to transition away from fossil fuels and fossil fuel expansion over time. And that means the industries that, you know, if we're going to make our 2050 targets, that means the industries that are driving those kind of things. So that's something that I would believe in champion in Victoria.
Bridget, do you have a comment on Nikki's comment?
I guess I would just ask, when you say champion, when it comes to a vote on subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, are you able to and willing to not vote along party lines?
Well, I've always been a person that believes in the change that needs to be done. And I really personally think that the BC NDP is a coalition of labor, environmental, Indigenous, and social movements. So I want to really sit down with all of my colleagues, if elected, and figure out a path forward to get to our targets. So that means championing the things that I believe and being willing to listen. I know there are Indigenous communities up north that have been supportive of different projects, or they rely on it for economic development or advocating for it. And I don't want to be in position of standing against the sovereignty of Indigenous people and the decision-making that they have on their land. So everything that in my mind comes to discussions and working together with people, and I really want to be part of that discussion to colleagues to get to the progress that we need to get to make the climate commitments. So that's something that I believe in and that I would be a part of. And I think that the work that I've done in my life has shown that. So.
You okay with that, Bridget? Do you want to push her a bit? You fine? Okay.
Well,
Just asking.
I mean, I hope that's true. I guess subsidies have increased substantially since the Liberal government, and I know that there is consent, but there is also dissent on Indigenous land, and it's not for us to have the discussion. It's for them to have the discussions, and you can't just agree and push through fossil fuel industries and with Indigenous people that agree with you. If we're going to honor UNDRIP, we also have to honor the Indigenous people that do not agree with these industries and want to protect their lands. And they don't need to be arrested and imprisoned, and that is not respecting Indigenous people. So I'll leave it there.
I mean, I just want to say that I agree we have to respect the point of view of Indigenous people of all sides. And I can have my personal beliefs, and I can also listen to different communities up north that are facing different challenges that I'm not facing in East Vancouver. So
Tim, if I may, I'd like to ask another question, and then maybe time permitting, we can open it up a bit more. The last question that Jeanette McIntosh, Margaret Marquardt, and I formulated a little while back and sent to the candidates is related to the question of what used to be called, may still be called in some circles, the 4 pillars approach to addiction. Some, not necessarily in this order, but involving education, law enforcement, if and when necessary, detox and treatment, including the availability of safe drugs, and the harm reduction. So the question is, and it's quite personal to me, but I'm not going to elaborate on that except to say that in my work, I've had to officiate at a lot of recent funerals and wakes for people who've lost loved ones through the opiate overdose crisis. I also am deeply empathetic to those people who are struggling with isolation as a result of some of the pandemic protocols. The question basically is, will you seek to retrieve, reaffirm, and work to implement the necessity of education, detox and treatment programs, harm reduction strategies, including availability of a safe supply of drugs, and law enforcement where and when deemed vital for the common good and health of our people?
Who's up first? I'm not sure.
You want to go first now, Bridget, and then allow Nikki to weigh in?
Okay, thank you. Well, the opioid crisis is also close to me, and we already know what to do and what has the possibility of working, so why aren't we doing it? Again, back to housing, a housing first approach. When trying to reach those living with addiction, meeting their basic needs is essential as a first step. I spoke to so many experts during the federal election who spoke of the successes they had when they could reach folks in a safe and stable environment. Access to mental health and addiction support, detox and addiction services is needed to succeed. As anyone who has loved ones who have struggled with addiction, as I have, when they decide to get treatment, the waiting list in the city can be days, even weeks, which is just not acceptable and does not work for someone who is ready to go right now. And a safe supply program is needed for those not ready so that they can manage their addiction safely and not die from a poisoned supply. I live very close to the epicenter at Main and Hastings, and I hear the ambulances and I see the struggles every day. Decriminalization for personal use can allow our healthcare system to deal with this health crisis. It's just a matter of prioritizing and taking action. Since the pandemic began, overdose deaths in BC have far outpaced those lost to COVID-19. Political will is what's needed to address this crisis. We've had the recommendations of Dr. Bonnie Henry for some time now in support of these initiatives, but for some reason the NDP aren't able to act quickly in this crisis.
My turn. I just wanted to start by saying that as a proud resident of this community, that some of the most progressive leaders in developing drug policy that saves lives have come from this area and really pushed the agenda not only locally, provincially, but also federally when it comes to having a compassionate response to our drug policy. And it has to have 3 levels to it: save lives, remove stigma, and provide the right services. And I believe that the BC&DB have a really strong commitment to this and a strong record of the work we've done. Is it a challenge that we still have to face and do more on? Definitely, especially since the pandemic hit us. I was in Victoria working on childcare when we formed government, and was so proud of the work that Judy Darcy did as a first minister of mental health and addictions to step forward and say, this is a challenge that we're going to take in a compassionate way that saves lives. Overdose deaths were down 36% in 2019. That was the first time since 2012. And I know that COVID has really hit a lot of people hard, and there's been spikes in deaths across Canada that need to be changed. We have a commitment to invest 25 million more in frontline mental health and social service workers. We have a commitment to fast track the move to decriminalization. So join the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs to call the federal government to decriminalize small amounts of personal use. This is also very personal to me because we know that people of color and Indigenous people are disproportionately impacted by these policies, so they need to be changed. We'll continue to work with Safe Supply to expand Safe Supply, as we've already done, to offer safe alternatives, prescription alternatives to toxic street drugs. And we know that for those people that want treatment, the treatment needs to be available. So we've been investing in doubling our treatment beds, for example, youth treatment beds from 104 to 247 treatment beds. And we'll commit to doing more, adding 800 treatment beds and build new treatment, recovery, and detox facilities across BC. And this is an issue that we have to tackle from all sides. And it's something that we've certainly shown our commitment to tackling, and we will continue to do so if elected. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Tim, any other questions in the chat box? We think we have a question from the Longhouse Church itself, but do you have another one from the chat box?
Yeah, we've got a few here. I'll maybe do a couple here. This is from Elvisio. In the face of the pandemic, globalized companies have become more profitable and are pulling capital out of our communities, while locally owned enterprises are struggling to stay afloat. What are your ideas on supporting local economic resilience and inclusion? And I think, Nikki, you're up first on this one.
Well, that's a really great question. I think we've all been appalled at the growing equity gap just the pandemic that has revealed. I think it said Bezos is on track to be a trillionaire. Meanwhile, businesses are shutting down around the corner, and it's something that's absolutely unacceptable. One thing that we've been doing and that I'm proud of is actually focusing on small businesses with our pandemic relief efforts. So helping them get access to credit and investing them to actually make the transition to be more resilient in face of the changes that need to be made from COVID. Our tax policy is actually progressive. The BC Liberals have focused their tax policy on taxing or giving the top 1% tax relief, whereas we've really tried to bring relief across the board. Nothing's more important than our local economy and our small businesses, and our pandemic stimulus package has a lot in there about focusing on our local economies and the businesses that need to survive through the pandemic. So yeah, I definitely think, especially in Vancouver-Hastings, we rely so much on the businesses around the corner that need to keep going.
It's a local.
Bridget, go for it.
Thanks. Well, I think your earlier question about a guaranteed livable income would very much help support this. And then I am a small business owner here in this riding, and so I hosted a bunch of kind of markets, food and artisan markets and festivals, which all got shut down. And so something I'm trying to get underway and working with the province is, so the farmers markets were able to operate during this pandemic. And so I'm trying to get an initiative where other kind of small scale food and artisan markets can also operate with safe COVID safety measures, et cetera, to kind of support those small businesses. Because the businesses that attended all my events were, you know, they work out of commissary kitchens. They don't have storefronts because the rents, I mean, let's talk about rental supplements for small business. The rents in the city to get, you know, 10,000 for a very tiny space. A small business starting out cannot afford stuff like that. So community events and markets and things like that really help get you off the ground, and online sales. And so supporting more community markets and artisan markets in that kind of open air, again, safe structure to support these businesses is essential. And I'm very committed to the small business community here, especially in food and vegan food, but very much an advocate of supporting them during this time. I've already known a few, unfortunately, a few small businesses and local kind of haunts that I've enjoyed that have shut down because they haven't been able to make it. And it's super sad.
Well, that was a great question. Thanks for both your answers. I've got one more, Barry, that's been a long time coming here from John Calvert, and another great, very neighborhood reality question. John says that there's extensive evidence that community health centers are an excellent way to provide primary health care, and we have only one in East Vancouver, namely Reach Clinic. Would you commit to expanding funding for Reach and to support at least one additional community health center in East Vancouver? Bridget.
Is it me? Did I go? Oh, it is me. Sorry. So I don't know too much about Reach personally, but I am a huge advocate of expanding local community health centers, absolutely, and including, fingers crossed, that mental health gets included in our provincial healthcare system. And adequate access to healthcare, including mental health, like I said, and expanding community services. I believe in evidence-based policy, and if they're providing successful supports to our community, then we need to put more money into that and support more primary care within our communities in those kind of services. So absolutely.
Thanks, Bridget. Nikki.
Okay, thank you for that. I've been learning over the last little while a lot about what Reach has been doing and the very specific and wonderful model of community health centers. I'll just start by saying that our platform and our commitments over time have double the amount of investments in healthcare than any of the other parties running. So that means that we are very committed to investing in services in the community. And I'm set to kind of visit Reach at some point where I would like to see on the ground about what the different types of investments and the success stories about the health determinants that are used to drive their services. And, you know, I'm a happy advocate for all the programs in the community that are working to serve the people. So that would certainly be something that I would take and advocate for in Victoria.
So Barry, you've got a question.
Yeah, we've got several people here in the sanctuary of the Longhouse, and one of them is Adrian right behind me. Do you want to ask the question?
You go ahead. I don't really know how to frame it.
Oh, you're pretty good at it. Adrian was saying he was just wanting to know, generally speaking, what representation does either of your parties have that includes Native or Indigenous persons? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, sure. You know, I have to start by saying, just as a person of color, that I'm proud that we have the most diverse slate of candidates in, I think, any party's history. And that means that we have 5 Indigenous colleagues running, and I think the most people of color that are running on the slate representing the whole province of BC. We were a party that, I don't know, we all know probably Melanie Mark, who was the first Indigenous cabinet minister, and hence just as a powerhouse when it comes to representation. So it's something that, you know, I think there's always more work to do. And I can say that personally, is that we don't see enough representation based on what the makeup of our communities are, but we are and have shown that we're making strides in that. So thanks for the question.
Thank you.
So one more question here, Tim. Oh, sorry, did Bridget want to respond?
Bridget's next. She hasn't had a chance to respond. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I apologize.
Sure. Yeah, we do have, I mean, Adam Olson, our elected MLA, is Indigenous, and we have Earl, who I know is also Indigenous. And we are very much trying to diversify even more than we already have. One of the downsides of a snap election is just the inequity in, you know, finding candidates with such little notice and getting them ready, and are they able to, you know, leave their jobs or put work on hold? So we only had 30 days to prepare for this, whereas who knows how long the NDP had been planning this themselves. So I will say that, but it's something we are so very much committed to. And we recently, a bunch of us Greens also committed to indoctoring the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report and pursuing those actions into BC law, as well as UNDRIP, and just moving forward diligently on reconciliation here in this province, and hopefully be an example for across the country. And thank you for your question.
Another question, if I may, Tim, from Devin
Webster.
Webster, yep.
Yes. Dharma. Last election, Mr. What is the Premier's name? Oregon. He promised a $500 relief plan for the people who were suffering from hardship, and we never received that at the last election. And this election, he's offering more money, $500 to $1,000, depending on your circumstance. And I'm wondering, why should I vote for somebody who just outrightly lies to you?
Thanks, Devin.
Should I go first to that? Devin, thanks for the question. I will say that the Pandemic Relief Fund, it will be $1,000 and $500 depending on income. And that was something that, you know, one of the things that I'm proud of as a BC NDP is that out of all of our platform commitments 3.5 years ago, we kept 80% of them, and 20% of them are being worked on. So we didn't get to delivering everything in 3.5 years, but we certainly have been standing beside the commitments we made and doing our best to deliver on it. And I think that you can have confidence if you look at our platform that we will do our best to deliver on all of them, and including the pandemic relief. And so I hope that you'll consider voting for us.
Just the COVID-19 issue was not not in the picture then, when John Horgan made that promise to the renters in BC. And I know I received some money from through the NDP party. I think it was $300 a month from June to September. And but COVID has nothing to do with it. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So Devin, thanks. Now I see you're talking about the renters rebate. I'm sorry that I didn't catch that the first time. So we have a commitment now with the renters rebate in our platform, and I believe that the reason that we weren't able to get there over the last 3.5 years is because of the coalition government and the work that we were doing on making sure that everybody agreed before things were passed. But one thing I will say is that I'm very proud of, which is that we got rid of MSP pavements. We invested in affordable childcare, bringing relief to many families. So we've dropped ICBC rates by 20%. So there's a lot of work we've done just on affordability measures at large. I see a frozen screen. I'm not sure if it means that we've lost you or not, but possibly.
Thanks, Nikki. Bridget, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, social assistance Like the rates in this province are abhorrent. The fact that they're under $1,000 a month, like including the price of your, supportive housing, et cetera, it's completely unacceptable. And again, I'll bring it back to that's where, a grant for renters paying more than 30% of their income comes into place. That's where more support for supportive housing, it's raising the rates, and it's where a guaranteed livable income comes in to bring equity into this province. Too many people are getting left behind, and kind of these small band-aid approaches of, small increments of money here and there obviously is not cutting it. And we need to change the systems that are operating in this province in order to bring real change and lift people out of poverty. Enough is enough.
Thanks, Bridget. Here's another question in the chat box from Giusilio, and it's for you, Nikki, but Bridget, give you a chance to respond too. But how will we attain our carbon emission reduction goals if the Parks Board, which you are chair of, continues to thwart building infrastructure to facilitate a safe environment for people who bicycle? And how will the NDP fund cycling education and infrastructure province-wide, but most importantly in our cities?
That's a great question. And I'll have to say that I was on the park board in 2011, and I'm really proud of our record in the short time that I was there about actually building up bike infrastructure. We had a transportation plan that was a Transportation 2040 transit plan. Then the goal was to get 50% of all trips done by transit, walking, or bike. And because of some key investments, we were able to get there a lot quicker. So I was definitely and always will be supportive of infrastructure that gets people out of cars and moving in different ways. So that means transit, that means bike infrastructure, that means a whole bunch of things about how we design our cities and how we shape the future. So I certainly think that the park board has a role to play, and I hope that they are building bike lanes, but I don't know if they're doing that right now. I'm sorry to say if they are not. I think it's certainly something that we supported. As part of the Clean BC plan, we have significant investments in transportation. And I didn't talk about it yet, but the Clean BC plan is a continent leading climate plan that we worked with the Green Party caucus to put together. And you'll see in our platform a lot of commitments that go directly towards transportation and active transportation, and transportation just getting people around better. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, straight up, if you want to reduce your GHGs, you need to vote green. I'm just going to get that in there. No one supports alternative forms of transportation more and more eco-friendly transportation than the Greens. And I know the Green Parks Board members now, and I know that they are all huge advocates of bike lanes and rapid transit and just providing the structures that support bicycling within the city. And I think it's a great way to get around. We're so fortunate here in BC too that the weather outside of all the rain is fairly conducive to supporting a cycling community. And I think even more, and the more that we push it and the more that we support it, I think everyone can get on board in the city. And we're there, we're getting there, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Thanks. Barry, I'm not sure where you are, if there are other questions in the Longhouse.
Can you hear me, Jim?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I'm the laptop I was using has gone off on its own, independent autonomy. So we're okay here from the Longhouse. Any other questions anybody wants to ask? Going once, going twice. Joe, you okay? Everybody okay? Andrew, you got a question? I'm good. This is great. All right, I think we're okay, Jim.
Okay. Kirsten, why don't you just unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So my name is Kirsten Duncan. I'm a two-term councillor for the city of Maple Ridge. And I have a disability. And what I've noticed is all the platforms, with the exception of the NDP, don't seem to speak about people with disabilities. I haven't seen anything much in the Green or Liberal or conservative platforms. I know the NDP talks a lot about people with disabilities, and I've seen stuff provincially about people with disabilities, but I haven't seen much in the other platforms. So I'd really like to know what the other parties are going to do to benefit and really assist people with disabilities, because we are people that often get and need some of the most assistance, because we're at a serious disadvantage and need a lot of resources and a lot of help just to get through life. And so I'd like to know what kind of resources, whether it's financial assistance or programs or other supports that you may make available or increase funding to. I'm wondering what your perspective is and what plans you might have, either directly your party or you yourself as a candidate, what you would like to do to try to increase the living standards for people with disabilities.
Thanks, Kirsten. Bridget, do you want to answer that first?
Sure. Thank you, Kirsten. Absolutely. And I think it comes back to an equitable society for all of us. And so I think when we're talking about supports for people with disabilities, it includes, again, a guaranteed livable income for, again, raising and making an equitable society for us all. So no one gets left behind, and there is no stigma that it's, you know, we're all provided this and, you know, a comfortable means. It's also, again, when we talk about access to health and mental health services, including those into our BC healthcare, again, provides for all, you know, and again, makes it more equitable. I'm very much focused on, I'm supportive of social services, but at the same time, our society, I want our society to think more equitably, that everyone deserves a baseline that is common amongst us, and that it does not serve any of us for members of our community to be suffering or down and out, and that I want to see everyone have the ability to thrive, and whatever help they need is available, but also that there's a baseline in this province that helps lift everyone up initially.
Thanks, Bridget. Nikki.
Is that it, Tim?
No, Nikki has to respond yet.
I'm sorry. God, I just want, carry on, please. I'm
okay. Sorry. Kirsten, thanks for the question. Certainly, I hear from people with different disabilities that there's a real challenge having different supports in place, particularly with the disability payments that put a lot of people in poverty or below poverty. I'm proud of the accomplishments that we've made so far, and with Shane Simpson advocating for a $300 a supplement for people with disability. And I heard personally from letters from lots of people that reached out to him, and I've read them, that said what a difference that's made in terms of lifting them further ahead than they were before. And certainly there's more to be done, and there's more investments that we need to make in supporting people with disabilities. And I'm proud of our commitments on healthcare and being a party that puts people at the center of all of our decision making. And that's part of the work we'll continue to do.
Barry, do you have any more?
Not any more questions. I'm just itching to thank these two good people. I don't want to prematurely close it off, although it is 8 o'clock. But I'm so grateful that Bridget and Nikki and Bridget could join us tonight. I mean, if I had my druthers, I wish we had 2 candidates to be elected from each riding, so we could put these 2 good people in to represent Vancouver-Hastings. I'm proud of you both and grateful to you both for your insights and the enthusiasm and the willingness to come on tonight and to engage us. And I hope through word of mouth and other means, other people can somehow benefit from this discussion. I know you're on the home stretch, to use a horse racing term, and I wish you both well in getting to the finish line, and maybe having to wait an extra 2 weeks, I understand, before the absentee ballots are finally counted. But I'm glad to be alive to witness this. And thank you, Tim, for setting this up so we could have it. And for everybody for joining and conjoining. And any last comments by anybody else, including the candidates?
Sure. I would just love to say, I just want the residents of Vancouver-Hastings to know that nobody will work harder for you than me. I will not stop until I see East Van residents thrive and shine and overcome the multiple crises affecting us all. I am honored to be running for the BC Greens under the leadership of Sonia Firstino, who has compassion and strength and the political will to do what's right for everyone in BC, and she puts people before politics, and I will too.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you for organizing.
I also want to thank everybody for organizing this. It's been so lovely to see all of the faces that I got to see on video and to answer questions, and to also spend time with you, Bridget, today to hear from you. And I just am so grateful for the opportunity to run to represent Vancouver-Hastings. What an amazing community we have that cares about each other and cares about making the world better. And if I were elected, you have my promise that I would be a fighter for you. I would advocate for the issues like I've done as a lawyer my whole life to make the community better, to make our lives better, and to make the planet better. So thank you for your time. Please go out and vote for sure. We have a few more days left in this campaign, and no matter the results, I just really am honored to be running in this election. So take care.
Yeah, I want to thank you both too for answering so well. You should all be consultants for Mr. Trump and Biden and how to do a debate. Maybe you send them something down there, okay? Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Tim. Well, peace and strength to you all, friends.
Yes.
Bye
Thanks,
for
everyone.
now.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.